In 2018, a group of experienced cavers from the University of Colorado penetrated an uncharted karst system in the Appalachians. Their target was a cave marked on old topographic maps as the Maw. They maintained contact for 2 more days. Then, the signals from their personal beacons became unstable. A week later, the search party found only a campsite and a single GoPro camera with a nearly erased memory card at the entrance. The team consisted of 4 people. The leader was geology professor Ethan Kruger, strict and pragmatic, a walking encyclopedia of karst. His graduate student and girlfriend, Sarah Lynch, was bold to the point of recklessness, possessing a talent for topographic surveying. The brothers, Leo, an engineer responsible for equipment and insurance, and Miles, a former military medic, were the most resilient and disciplined. They weren't tourists. They were professionals with years of experience. Their equipment was the best on the market: LiDAR scanners, laser rangefinders, satellite trackers, with underground repeaters. The silent system was discovered using LiDAR images, which revealed a huge cavity. The entrance was a narrow, unremarkable crevice in the hillside, blocked by fallen trees. The first 300 meters were a classic fishing hole, a narrow, winding, descending passage. The air was crisp, with a slight draft, the sign of a large, unsealed system. They set up base camp in the first spacious grotto, vestibule. The walls were dotted with strange, unnatural markings, even furrows at head level. "Looks like tool marks," Ethan said, running a gloved finger over them. "Very old, probably 19th century miners." Sarah began compiling a detailed map. Leo was setting up communication repeaters. Miles checked his supplies. Everything was going according to plan. The first strange thing happened with Leo's camera. His helmet-mounted action cam malfunctioned at some point. The image became filled with noise for a few seconds, and the audio began picking up a low-frequency hum that faded to a whisper. They attributed this to interference from humidity and minerals. On the second day, they discovered a narrow passage leading downward, which they named the throat. Only one person could enter at a time, crawling on their stomachs. At the bottom, a huge chamber awaited them. The cathedral, stalactites and stalagmites formed phantasmagorical columns, and in the center, on the clay floor, they found it. No skeleton, no artifact. They found a boot, a modern trekking boot, almost new. An empty backpack lay nearby. No tags, no documents. Inside, the boot was dry. Miles, as a medic, examined it. No signs of a struggle, no cuts in the fabric. It's as if the person just vanished, leaving their boot behind. At that moment, Sarah, who had been examining the walls, said in a trembling voice, "Guys, there's writing here." Something had been scratched into a relatively smooth wall, at chest level, not ancient, most likely from a knife or a helmet. The letters were crooked, hastily written. "It doesn't breathe air, it breathes quietly. Do not make noise." Below, as if adding another note, another, more trembling hand wrote, "The map lies. The walls are moving." The mood shifted from scientific excitement to tense caution. Ethan insisted on continuing. They needed to install seismic sensors deep within the system. Miles suggested retreating and reporting the discovery to the authorities. Leo, the technician, was checking his equipment. His laser rangefinder had begun to show errors in confined spaces. It was showing the distance to the wall a meter too far. "Maybe the humidity is affecting the beam," he muttered, but his voice was uncertain. They moved further into a side tunnel called the gut. Here, the walls became damp and soft, composed of some strange plastic clay. The air grew heavier, the sweet smell intensified. And then they encountered the first physical phenomenon. Their voices stopped echoing. The sound became muffled, as if absorbed by the tunnel lining. "Acoustic anomaly," Ethan said, but his brow furrowed. "Porous rock." It was in the guts that Sarah noticed her map and compass readings were no longer aligned. The magnetic field here was chaotic. They were leaving glowing trails behind them. An hour later, after what seemed like a few hundred meters, Leo turned around and gasped. The trail they should have left was hanging on the wall. Forward. Impossible. We didn't turn back. Panic, cold, and stickiness gripped them for the first time. They decided to return to the cathedral. They walked for 2 hours, retracing their steps. And they didn't find themselves in the cathedral. They emerged into a small, unknown grotto. In the center lay 3 stones stacked together, and on the wall was a clear, simple symbol drawn in charcoal, an arrow pointing down into a narrow crack in the floor. Next to it was the same inscription, "Keep away." Miles, the military man, was the first to discuss tactics. "We're being led. Someone or something knows about us. It's a trap." Ethan, the scientist, refused to believe anything irrational. "We're disoriented. It could be gas. Methane or CO2 in low concentrations can cause hallucinations and spatial memory loss." They checked the gas analyzer. The readings were normal, except for the abnormally high radon level, but even that wasn't critical. They spent the night, or rather, the sleep period, according to the chronometer, in this grotto, calling it the uninvited guide's room. They slept in shifts. Sarah, awake, recorded a voice diary. In the recording, found later, her whispers can be heard. Ethan's sleeping. Leo's checking the ropes. Miles. How? Miles just sits there, staring into this crack. He hasn't moved for an hour. I ask if everything is okay. He says, "Can you hear me?" I hear nothing. It's just falling. And he says, "No. Between the drops, it's breathing." The next morning, Miles was different, calm but detached. He insisted on following the arrow. "This is the only way. There's no turning back. The map lies. This place is alive, and it wants us to go down." His authority as a former Special Forces soldier made the others pause. Retreating through an ever-changing labyrinth was more terrifying than plunging into the unknown. The crack led to a vertical shaft. They began their descent. Absolute silence reigned here. Even the sound of carabiners and ropes seemed muffled. The shaft was deeper than the laser rangefinder, indicated about 60 meters. Below, a huge chamber opened up, the largest they had ever seen. The air here was different, dry, dusty, and smelling of ozone, like after a thunderstorm. Ethan, stunned, called it the maw. The walls and ceiling were covered not with stalactites, but with something resembling giant black glassy deposits, obsidian. In the light of the lanterns, they reflected and distorted the light, creating the illusion of movement. And it was here that they found the library. Dozens of objects lay against the wall: rusty miners' helmets with kerosene, lamps, modern flashlights, empty tin cans from various eras, and several backpacks. It was a gear graveyard, and on a separate, flat stone lay a stack of notebooks and scraps of paper, carefully folded under the stones to keep them from blowing away in the wind, which was non-existent here. Sarah felt physically ill. These were journals, those who had come before them. Flipping through them was more terrifying than encountering any monster. The entries were frantic, but they described stages. The first pages, technical notes, enthusiasm. Then came mentions of strange sounds, whispers of stone, a feeling of being watched, then panicked entries about losing direction, about moving walls. The final pages were almost all the same, an obsession with silence. It hates sound. Noise attracts it. You must be quiet. Very quiet. 1. apparently the last survivor of his group, wrote in large letters, using the last of his strength, "It is not a thing." Ethan, pale as a wall, denied mass psychosis, gas poisoning, hallucinogenic mold spores, but his hands were shaking. Leo, the engineer, walked up to one of the glass walls and aimed the scanner at it. The screen froze, then displayed absurd data. According to the scanner, behind a 30-centimeter thick obsidian wall lay a void several kilometers long, and then the scanner shut off forever. Miles walked to the center of the room, where a massive dark stalagmite jutted from the floor, like a throne or an altar. He removed his glove and touched it with his palm. "Warm," he said without turning around. And then a vibration, very faint, like a heartbeat. At that moment, Sarah, leafing through the last journal, let out a muffled groan. On the penultimate page was a crude but recognizable map of their route from the entrance to the maw. And the caption, "If you are reading this, it means it allowed you to come here. It means it is interested in you. The choice is now yours. Sit by the stone, hear the silence. Become part of the silence, or become food for the sound. It's already watching. It's always watching from the walls." She raised her head and looked at the opposite wall. And in the distorted obsidian mirrors, she saw not 4, but 5 reflections. The 5th figure was tall, blurred, and stood behind them, in the center of the hall, where no one was. Leo's mind, an engineer who lived by logic and facts, couldn't bear this contradiction. He screamed, shrill, desperate, full of terror and helplessness. His scream, the first truly loud sound in this hall, perhaps in decades, didn't echo through the vaults. It seemed to hit the walls and remained hanging in the air, slowly fading but not disappearing completely, as if it had been swallowed but not digested. And the cave responded. Not with a roar, not with a growl. It responded with movement. The walls of plastic clay in the quiche they had entered through shifted, slowly, centimeter by centimeter, but inexorably, narrowing the passage. At the same time, fine dust and pebbles began to rain down from the ceiling of the maw. A quiet, rustling sound. The return was cut off. Panic became all-consuming. Ethan screamed for them to collect samples. Samples! Sarah sobbed, clutching the map to her chest, and Miles stood motionless, staring into the void where he saw his reflection. Leo, laughing hysterically, slammed his fist against the glass wall. "Show yourself! Show yourself, creature!" And it showed itself, not as a creature, as an effect. Everyone's flashlights simultaneously went out, not off. They seemed to fade, their light swallowed by the darkness, which suddenly became physically solid. In the pitch darkness, they heard a sound, that same sound between the drops that Miles had spoken of. A slow, wet inhalation and exhalation, emanating not from one point, but from everywhere, and the smell, sweet and metallic, intensified tenfold. In the pitch darkness, a primal, animalistic urge to flee overwhelmed them. They crawled blindly, bumping into each other and the walls. Miles, who had retained some semblance of sanity, shouted, "Follow me! The crack!" He remembered the direction. They crawled toward the crack in the ceiling that led into the shaft. Leo went first. When he was almost lost in the hole, they heard his last cry, short and broken, and the sound of a body falling, not down into the shaft, but somewhere to the side, into the wall, as if he had been sucked into a side passage that wasn't on the map. Now there were 3 of them. They froze in the darkness, listening to that breathing, which had grown a little closer. Sarah, crying, whispered, What does it want? Ethan, with tears in his eyes, replied, "It wants us to shut up forever." And Miles made a decision. In a calm, almost detached voice, he said, "Professor, you have a lighter. In my backpack, in a waterproof bag, there's a flare. Magnesium. It burns bright and loud." Ethan realized, "You're crazy. You'll attract." "Exactly. But," Miles interrupted, I'll distract. And you, climb up, and don't look back. Light it when I say." They found the flare. Miles crawled to the side, deeper into the room, toward the altar. His voice came from the darkness. "Now." Ethan struck the lighter and lit the fuse. A blindingly white, roaring fire flared, momentarily illuminating a nightmarish scene from the darkness. Distorted obsidian walls, a pile of rubble near the library, and the figure of Miles, sitting with his back to them by a stalagmite, and movement the shadows on the walls converged on him, like tentacles drawn by the light and roar of the flames. Sarah and Ethan crawled through the crack. They climbed the rope, terrified that someone would grab their feet at any moment. From below came an inhuman hissing sound, not a scream, but as if the air were torn by a contradiction, a bright, loud fire in the realm of silence. Then the light went out and silence fell, even more complete than before. They crawled upward toward the room of the uninvited guide. Without Leo, without Miles, without most of their gear, they walked, almost crawled, by memory, by the vague sensation of a draft. After 6 endless hours, they saw daylight filtering through the Groat. They emerged to the surface, blinded by the sun. Their story was met with skepticism. Radon poisoning, hallucinations, panic, Leo's accident. Miles was declared missing. The cave had been sealed off as dangerous. But Sarah couldn't stop. She recovered the data from her camera. There, in the moment before the light went out, a single frame, enhanced and processed, showed more than just a reflection. The soft clay wall behind Miles was visible, casting more than just a shadow. It formed a fuzzy, blurred, yet recognizable relief, as if the features of a human face, distorted by a silent scream, were momentarily imprinted on it. And another fragment of sound, cleansed of noise, not breathing, a whisper, a single overlapping word, spoken on an exhalation, quiet, quiet, stay on. Professor Ethan Kruger retired from the university. He lives in a small house in the mountains. They say he can't stand silence. The radio is always playing, or the television is blaring. And Sarah Lynch published a dissertation on the psychology of perception in extreme isolation. She sometimes lectures. The last slide always contains the same quote from an anonymous speleological diary. What's scary isn't that there's something in the cave. What's scary is that the cave itself is something, and it's ancient, hungry, and completely indifferent to you. To it, you're just a random sound, an irritating noise in the eternal silence, and it will do anything to make this noise stop, because silence isn't the absence of sound. It is the true master of the underground world, and it is jealous. And the silence system is still waiting for its new explorers. The Geological Survey periodically records strange, weak seismic tremors in the area, not tectonic, rhythmic, like the beating of a huge, slow heart, or like the attempts of something locked in the stone darkness to knock on the outside, to be heard, or to warn, don't make any noise.